welcome everybody here for this event. It's pretty exciting for the Criminal Justice Program to be able to sponsor a quality speaker to come in and talk about it, an area which my course also covers as well. It certainly doesn't have all the expertise and the experience Dave Reichert has in working serial killer cases, but we're working on trying to learn from these kind of cases as well. Since about 1970, there's been an increase in homicides which appear to be random and seemingly motiveless. Okay? It's a little different than a lot of homicides where you can usually, often easy to identify suspects because there's some type of motive. So who has a motive for killing? When they seem seemingly motiveless, that really throws a kink in trying to identify these people. So we work on particular tools that have been developed since about 1970. There's a field that used to be called psychological profiling, which is now referred to as criminal investigative analysis. So we do the same type of work to analyze crime scenes to try to determine the personality and behavioral characteristics of somebody. So it's more of an analytical than it is investigative, and this is an area in criminal investigations course at Wenatchee Valley College that we cover and teach as well. So it gives our students a pretty good idea of that particular psychological science. So I want to thank you for coming, and I know there are students here. I now have my students here, and I have the roster here so I can take roll. That's important. And are there any Heritage University students present now? All right. All right, so we have some. We were expecting you to come down. Unfortunately, your instructor, Kim, couldn't make it today, and she was really looking forward to it. All right. I'd like to get on now to introducing our special guest. Dave Reichert served 32 years in the King County Sheriff's Office beginning in 1972. He was the lead detective in the Green River Task Force formed to track down the prolific serial killer in our the most prolific serial killer in our country's history. Okay. He headed up the Green River Task Force. In 2001, DNA evidence identified Gary Leon Ridgeway as the Green River Killer. In 1997, Dave became the first elected sheriff in 30 years in King County. He is now serving his 6th term representing Washington's 8th congressional district as a congressman. In 2004, he published an autobiography called Chasing the Devil, My 20-Year Quest to Capture the Green River Killer. It's a book that's getting onto my shelf here pretty quick. Absolutely. He served as president of the Washington State Sheriff's Association. He was an executive board member of the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs. In 2004, he won the National Sheriff's Association Sheriff of the Year Award, 2 Valor Awards, and the Washington State Attorney General's Award for Courageous Action. Okay. If any of you were around, I'm dating us, Dave, okay? If you were around. A lot of my students didn't even know who O.J. Simpson was, but yeah, if you were around, you would have remembered, obviously, the Green River killer case. It was prominent on television, and it was a very difficult case. But through certainly an awful lot of work and really waiting in history for the technology of DNA to come out, it was a big help on that. But it never comes from just one thing. It comes from endless and endless hours of working to speak for those who can't speak for themselves, and those are the victims of these killers. So Dave Reichert is one person who is very much spoke for these poor victims. So he can tell you about that more than I can. So I'd like to introduce to you Congressman David Reichert.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to walk around down here. Don't you hate it when, I'm not a professor, by the way. But when I was in college, I hated it when the professors came, into the aisleways and walked up and down the aisleways because sometimes I wasn't always the most alert student. I was speaking to the University of Washington once, they have 500 students in one class, and I was going up and down between the aisles, and I found a young lady who was sleeping. I mean, she was like zonked. Was totally out, snoring. And so I tapped her friend and I said, "Hey, what's her name?" I don't know what it was, Kathy or whatever it was. And so I told the whole class of 500 people, I'm going to count to 3. When I count to 3, scream, Kathy. They, I won't tell you what happened to her, but obviously she woke up. I don't think she ever fell asleep in a classroom again. But hey, thanks for having me today. Boy, that's loud, huh? Am I echoing at all? Okay, I'm good. I'm not a professor, and I'd like to think that I'm a sort of a teacher, but I've never been a teacher other than I was a youth group leader in my church for 20 years, and then as a police officer I was just 8 weeks shy of 33 years, so I always say 33. Started when I was 21, but you know, I got to help a lot of young people and counsel a lot of young people, and through that process, I guess you're teaching. A congressman sometimes, you know, speaks to universities and high schools and middle schools and participates in reading programs in grade schools and things like that. So I guess in that sense, teach a little bit. And I taught my own children and now my grandchildren. My oldest grandson and granddaughter are students at Whitworth University in Spokane. He plays football, she plays soccer there. But I like to share my experience, not only with Green River, but how I ended up in the middle of that and how I ended up in Congress, because the whole story, if you buy the book, Chasing the Devil, I don't make any money from the book. All of the proceeds go to the Pediatric Interim Care Center in Kent, and they take in drug-addicted babies. And of course, the reason for that is that I would say 90% of the young girls and women who are on the street were drug-addicted or alcohol-addicted, and they left their homes as runaways from, you know, a dysfunctional home life, whether it was sexual abuse, emotional, physical, domestic violence, you know, whatever is going on in that home. They ran away. They left. They went out onto the street, and they ended up, and back then, pimps worked the street, and they drove Cadillacs. So some of the old movies that you see, that was pretty accurate back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so they ended up with these pimps who took them in and, you know, said they were going to love them. And what they did was get them on drugs and put them on the street as prostitutes. And so they were victimized again. And then in that world, in the 80s, the young girls were arrested. And they were victimized again by the system. So let's go back to where they first started. They left because they were victimized at home. And that's really where we should have been focused. Why did they end up on the street in the first place? Not the fact that they were on the street and had broken the law. But these young girls, and they were girls, some girls that worked the street were 11 years old that we ran into, 11 years old. So it's just really a sad, tough world that they grew up in. Fortunately today, we've grown a little bit wiser, and we're approaching this in this whole idea of human trafficking in a much different way. We're taking the approach that these girls and young women need our help. And so rather than put them in juvie or somewhere else, we're trying to get them some help. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the oldest of 7, and I grew up in a home with domestic violence. I ran away from a home when I was a senior in high school, and lived in a 1956 Mercury. How many people know what a 1956 Mercury looks like? One? I tell, usually junior high and high school kids, they're all going, I have no clue what that, Google it, Bing it, or whatever you do. You can see a picture of a 56 Mercury. I paid $100 for it. I was what they called a box boy way back then, so I carried groceries out of grocery stores. They're carry-out persons now, and so I saved $100 and bought this car and left home. And lived in the Kent Valley, and so I was probably one of the first homeless people, I think, in Kent. But I continued to go to high school, and I'll tell you why. There are 2 reasons. well, maybe 3. I played basketball and I played football, so that kept me coming back. And girls, obviously. 3 things. So I graduated. That was a good deal. Now, I ended up with 2 years of college. We couldn't afford it. We were a pretty poor family. But I ended up with 2 years of college because the last football game I played at Camp Meridian High School, there was a coach sitting in the stands from Concordia Lutheran College in Portland. And after the game, I happened to score a touchdown that game, and after the game he asked me if I would want to play some junior college football. So I went to Concordia. They paid for my books, tuition, and got me a job on campus. That's how I got my 2 years of school. Joined the Air Force, was active duty for about 7 months or so, and then got off active duty and went right into the sheriff's office. I took the test. Back then, the tests were, do they still give tests where it's the best of the best and the worst of the worst answers? Do you guys have to choose, like, what's the best answer out of the, no? I know that's a good thing, because this was an old civil service. It was reading, writing, and arithmetic. Tom, you probably took the same test way back when. I took it in 1971, and I have dyslexia. And so those are almost like a story problem, really, and so my mind didn't really work around that things in the way that most other minds do. But I passed. They hired 110 people in the sheriff's office in 1971 and 72. I was number 82 out of 110. That's where I scored. And I had 10% veterans preference that helped me pass the test. If I didn't have the 10%, I would have been a lot closer to the 110, or I may not have made it. I tell people today, we take a test now every 2 months, I think, in the sheriff's office, and you hire like 1 or 2 people out of 300 folks. Maybe it's not that much anymore. We can talk about police and community a little bit later too, but so I would not have hired myself today if I was the sheriff. I wouldn't have gotten hired. And I know that the sheriff and the command staff probably looked at that list, and I know they didn't go down to number 82 and say, that Dave Reichert, someday he's going to be the sheriff. But I went on patrol. I did the best job that I could do. And I'll tell you a couple lessons that I learned. We're going to get into Green River. Don't worry about that. But one of the first calls I had was a burglary report. I was so nervous. I've been shot at. I've had my throat cut with a butcher knife, had a guy jump me and slit my throat, and 40-some stitches in my neck, and it was a domestic violence thing. But this was just like one of my first calls. You know how you start your first job and you're kind of nervous? I went to the door, and all I had to do was take a report. It was the lady that's telling me that her house was broken into, and she had some things stolen. But still was a little nervous. So I'm standing at the door, and she tells me, yeah, my back window was broken, and whoever broke into my house stole a jar of pennies, some booze, and a jar of candy. Who does that sound like to you? Kids, yeah. So I walked in, and, cops, today and back then, if they get a call like that, I'll tell you, there's some police officers that would say, okay, some booze, candy, pennies, they'll write the report, they walk around the house, and they drive off. Because, you're never going to catch the guy. But that's not the way that I do things. That's not what I thought. So I walked around the house, and I tried to get some fingerprints, couldn't get any prints. Found some footprints in the right below the window that was broken. Just looked like, tennis shoe marks. That was about all you could get out of that. But I looked in the backyard, and there was a candy wrapper way in the back of the yard. So I walked back there, and I picked up the candy wrapper, and I thought, well, I wonder if there's any other candy wrappers. There's a little trail going through the power lines. So I followed this little trail. Another candy wrapper. I did that for almost a mile into the power lines, picking up candy wrappers. And I get to the last candy wrapper, and there's a piece of paper that had fallen out of this person's pocket when they pulled the last wrapper out, and it had his name on it. And it was a forged absence request for school that day at Decatur High School in Federal Way. So I made a phone call quick to the high school, and they said, yeah, we have that student, but he's sick today. And I said, no, he's not. I bet I know where he is. So I drove to the house and talked to the mom. Mom said, well, I don't think he's home. And I said, let's check his bedroom. So We walked down the hallway and opened up the door, and sure enough, he's sitting in his room. So he'd snuck, gone off to school and then snuck back in. Mom didn't know he was there. So we looked in the closet, and that kid had a closet full of stolen property. I solved 35 burglaries following a path of candy wrappers. 35 burglaries. Stereo equipment and, you name it. The kid had it all jam-packed into his closet, under his bed, and he was selling the stuff at school. So, okay, why do I tell you that story? Always do the best you can in any job, in any place. And if you're a student, in class, and you are, otherwise you wouldn't be here, the best that you can wherever you are. Because I'll tell you, that is the way that you're going to succeed. And you never know what that extra effort would result in. Following candy wrappers, I expected maybe I might, solve one burglary. But 35, we were getting ripped off. People were getting ripped off in that neighborhood left and right. We couldn't figure out who was doing it. But it took that little extra time to follow a string of candy wrappers. So throughout my whole career, it takes you a while to learn that lesson. I didn't learn it, all that day. But in each case that I worked and applied that lesson to, people begin to notice, there's something, Dave Reichert may not have been the highest scoring person on that list, but man, does that guy put the effort in, and is he thorough, and he never gives up. Just never give up. I'm going to catch this guy. I'm going to solve this case. That carried on with me, of course, had to, with Gary Ridgeway. So let me share another story early on that I had in my patrol career. This is all Federal Way. This is where I did most of my time, Burien, Federal Way area. And I call this the naked man story. So if anybody's asleep, and now I'm going to tell you a naked man story, everybody should be awake now. Right? The naked man story, what the hell could that be about? Oh, I can't say that. What the heck could that be all about? The naked man story. Okay, this is another lesson that I learned that helped me in the Green River case. Working graveyard shift, of course, what happens is dispatch comes across and says, hey, whatever my car number was back then, reports of a naked man running through a neighborhood in Federal Way. So I drive to the neighborhood, shut off my police car, dark, turn the lights off, shut the engine off, and roll the window down. Yes, you had to roll the window down. Yeah. There was not a little button. It was over here, roll the window down. My partner goes a few blocks down the street, and he turns his police car off, does the same thing. We sit there and wait. It doesn't take too long. All of a sudden, right in front of my windshield, runs by a guy fully clothed. I'm going, what the heck? I couldn't have got dressed that quick, right? But seconds behind him, naked man. Now, I'm going, what's wrong with this picture? Naked man's chasing guy in the clothes. It should be reversed, right? Does that make sense? Because when you think of naked man, I do. When naked man running through a neighborhood at night, I immediately think what's up with the naked man, right? Drunk, emotional problems, mentally ill, needs some help. That's what I thought. Naked man is chasing the guy wearing the clothes. So we flip everything on, chase these guys down. We have to tackle the guy in the clothes. The naked man stops. I'm glad he did, because I didn't want to get in a wrestling match although I have been in wrestling matches with naked people, but it's not the most pleasant thing in the world. That's a whole other story. So we get these guys in two different cars, and here's the story. Naked man's the good guy. He's been working all night, swing shift, comes home, got dinner cooking, and jumps in the shower, and he's going to get his dinner out of the oven, sit down, eat dinner, watch TV, and go to bed. So he jumps in the shower, steps out of the shower, looks to his left. Uh-oh, window's open. There's the guy wearing the clothes, peeking in his window. Peeping Tom. Naked guy says, I don't care if I got underwear on or not, I'm catching the peeping Tom. So out the front door he went, and that's how the naked man story happened. But what lesson does that teach? Things aren't always, what they appear to be. And that's another important, if you guys are all thinking about law enforcement, never give up, be thorough, do the best you can in any job. I don't care if you think, and Tom will tell you too, the chief will tell you, in police departments, like anywhere else in any job, and I don't care if it's a small police department or, the sheriff's office where I came from, 1,100 employees, there's always politics inside. So somebody else gets an assignment over here, we're all, we're griping about how did they get that, it should be me, and I have to admit, I plead guilty to doing some of that in my 33-year career, but I learned soon that's not the way that you're going to succeed. Always do the best you can. Whatever's going on, it doesn't really, it's a waste of energy to complain and gripe about why somebody's going somewhere and you're not. If you keep doing your job, and this is what I found out my whole career, and you do the best of your ability and you never give up, you will succeed. People will notice you. That's how I ended up in homicide, because I could give you a list of the naked man stories that I didn't assume, and I went in another direction that no one else was going because they did make assumptions. And I could give you a list of cases where I followed it, even though it didn't look like it was going to lead anywhere, and you kept up and you solved the case. And so someone recognized that, asked me to be a homicide detective. So I went to homicide and robbery. And in 1982, I was walking past the sergeant's desk, and the sergeant asked, he hung up the phone and he said, "Hey, Dave, the comm center just called. There's a body in the Green River, and you're here, so go handle it." That's how I ended up at the Green River case. And I really believe, and I'll just be honest with you, this is my personal faith. God has a plan for everyone, had a plan for me, and I don't think it was a coincidence that I walked past that desk and that the sergeant had just hung up that phone. And so off to the river I went, and I started with Debbie Bonner case, and 3 days later came Cynthia Hines, Opal Mills, and Marcia Chapman. I found Opal Mills on the riverbank, and a rafter had come down the river, found 2 bodies up against the bank with large rocks piled on top of the bodies. Thought they were mannequins at first, and then realized they were not. And so I got called, and in the process of processing the scene, I found a 3rd body on the bank. What we discovered later is that Ridgeway had just dropped that body, was ready to put it in the water with the other 2. The rafter came around the corner, saw Ridgeway. The grass was like about 5 or 6 feet tall, and he was dragging the body through the tall grass down to the riverbank. And when the rafter said, "Hey," and Ridgeway waved at him, he dropped the body and then decided, he'd been seen. Partially, he got in his truck and drove off. And the rafter couldn't get a license plate number. So when I came to the riverbank that day, I was only an hour or 2 behind Gary Ridgeway. But it took 19 years. Isn't that something? I was an hour or 2 behind. He was standing in the same place I was standing in an hour or 2 before I got there. And we didn't know until 19 years later. But we collected, I should say, over 100 outdoor crime scenes. I became an expert in identifying human remains, an expert in processing outdoor crime scenes. We collected 10,000 items of evidence. We collected birds' nests. Somebody want to guess why we might collect birds' nests? Yes, in the back? Yeah, yep. You're right. Human hair or fibers from their clothing woven in the nests, so we always looked up and grabbed. When we really got down to on our hands and knees, on the riverbank one day, we had probably 200 search and rescue folks, and we were going miles down the bank, and we found a blouse about a mile down the bank that he had thrown out. That was Cynthia Hines' blouse. We learned later, one of the search and rescue young ladies let out a scream, a shrill scream, screaming she found a finger. So I went down and looked at it and spread the grass apart. And everybody's on their hands and knees clipping grass, and they're going through, and sometimes magnifying glasses were used and tweezers, and we were really, really thorough. Because what did I learn way back with the candy wrappers, right? We weren't going to miss a thing. Well, she was so good that what she found was a steelhead lure. So it was pink, and it looked like a fingertip. So she felt bad that she screamed because it was a fishing lure. But I felt good because, boy, if she's that thorough, there was no way they were going to miss anything on the riverbank that day. But we also, even something so small as a hair or a fiber, collected a stump at one of the scenes that we knew there was a wrestling match where this woman had been, this body was found. There were fabric impressions into the soft mud of the root ball. I mean, this is a root that was taller than me and probably 6-8 feet wide, covered in mud, and had been cut off, and it was just a stump. I had a backhoe come out. We wrapped that in paper, blankets, and taped it all up. And we carefully placed that in the back of a U-Haul van with a truck with a backhoe. The property room wasn't real happy to get a stump that they had to store for a while, but we had 40,000 tips. 40,000 tips. We didn't have a computer back in 1982. We didn't have DNA. Does anybody know what a Rolodex file is? Hey, that's good. Most people don't. It's just a little thing that's got 2 knobs on the side, and you flip it. It's got 3x5 cards in it, and you write the information down. It was the first computer. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it was alphabetical. That was what we used. We were managing all of those murder cases. Up until 1986, we got our first computer. It was called the VAX computer. It would fill up this room. That was the first computer. And guess what? All you could do is type information in it. And then you could ask for the information back. But it couldn't make any comparisons or correlations with any of the other information in the computer. So we did. We had a list of people who drove pickup trucks, a list of people who had a fishing license, a list of people who assaulted women. Didn't make a difference whether it was on the street or at home. Assault on females. And we had lots of lists. So we take the registered owners of pickup trucks and we'd print that out, and it would come out on a sheet like this with perforated sides, and we'd unfold it the length. We were in an old junior high school in Burion's where our offices were. That would go the length of a hallway. Then we take those arrested for patronizing prostitutes. We put that down next to it. Assaulting women, we put that list down next to it. We put detectives on their hands and knees with highlighters, and you'd yell out a license plate, a phone number, or an address, or a name, and we would look for it on the other lists, and then you'd highlight it. Now computers, of course, can do that for us, but back then we had to do that all by hand. Isn't that something? How far we've come. DNA, this is an exciting piece here. The only bodies that were intact enough to take any physical evidence from were the first bodies found on August 12th and on August 15th. That's it. After that, 2 decomposed. We were able to get bodily fluids from the victims at the river, spermatozoa to be exact, and froze it in a test tube. 2 samples frozen in a test tube. In 1987, we had Ridgeway as a suspect, and we had enough. Now, this is the first time in history, by the way, that you just spoke about profiling briefly in your introduction, that profiling was used as probable cause in a search warrant in the country. First time. So we used that with Melvin Foster, and we used it with Gary Ridgeway. So the task force were the first ones to use this. So with Ridgeway, we were able to get enough for the judge to say, we wanted a blood draw, and he said, no, too invasive, you can't do it. So, but you can ask him to chew on a gauze. So we asked him to chew on a gauze. We put the gauze in a test tube and froze that. 82 bodily fluids from victims, 87 gauze with saliva, And all we're thinking in '82, I'm 31 years old then, by the way. I had dark brown hair. I was 6'8", I think, 240. About. Yeah, shrunk me 7 inches, and I lost, about 50 pounds. No. These guys are going, wow, that did that to you? Just checking to see if you're awake. So in '82, we had the samples. '87, the saliva. DNA, we didn't know. All it was is blood typing back then. We were looking for, hopefully, to match those two, to say they were both A positive, O positive, B negative, whatever. That's all we were looking for. Never heard of DNA. Never heard of it. But we kept those samples frozen. In 1999, the first DNA science started. There were only 2 labs in the entire country that were doing anything with DNA, and they were both on the East Coast. We flew a detective back with our frozen samples. They looked at them, said, science hasn't really developed to a point where we can look at it, we'll try, and your samples are so minute and so fragile that we could destroy them. So they looked at them, they did some preliminary tests and said, we just don't want to ruin the evidence. Science has not developed to a point where we can do the examination yet. So we flew back, we put it back in the freezer. They said, we'll call you when the science gets better. In 2001, early 2001, they said, hey, we think we're at a point where we can look at your samples. And so we submitted our evidence in 2001. And I didn't go through all my history through the sheriff's office, but if you want to know about that, we can go back. In 2001, September 10th, the day before 9/11, I was the sheriff. The detective comes to my office with 3 pieces of paper. 1, a victim, Opal Mills, DNA sample, we have a profile. 2, Marcia Chapman, DNA sample, we have a profile. They're the same. I mean, that was the most exciting news we've had since 1982, now in 2001. We have DNA matches between 2 victims. So all it tells us is the same person left that sample there. The next piece of paper he turned over, at the top he had written Green River Killer, and the DNA profile matched the 2 victims. I mean, you can imagine how we felt. There were tears in my office. Because think about the bodies that we recovered. Little girls, 14, 15, 16 years old. And I had to go to the houses and tell the parents, we just found your daughter's body. She'd been murdered. And you can't imagine the horrific impact on the families. Yeah, the memories really aren't that good for me either. But it's a stressful place to be. But we were happy. We put him under surveillance. Oh, I should tell you that after he gave me that piece of paper that said Green River Killer, he took out an envelope and he handed it to me and he said, here's the guy. And I said, I don't even need to open it. It's Gary Ridgeway. Opened it up and it's a mugshot of Gary Ridgeway when he was first arrested in 1982 for human trafficking. That's the only time he'd ever been arrested. We put him under surveillance, and we had him under surveillance about 2 months. He contacted another young girl on the street, and we arrested him because we just wanted to see, is he still out there? And as soon as we knew he went to the street, boom. And it happened to be one of our police officers, too, that he ended up trying to make a deal with in 2001. So we arrested him at Kenworth Trucking. We surrounded Kenworth Trucking. And I was listening. I was at the command center. Hard for me not to be at the scene after all that I had been through with that case. But that's not the sheriff's job. Your job is to make sure and manage the the people that you have assigned to the case. So my job had changed. But here's what I heard. They'd arrived. The shift had ended. Gary Ridgeway, They just had seen him walk out of the trucking company. He was a painter. And they drove up next to him, and they said, "Gary Ridgeway." We knew who he was, but we wanted him to say, "Yes, yes. Gary, you're under arrest for the murders of," and we listed off the victims. And he said, "Okay, here's my lunch bucket." He got in the car, and off we drove. And then they said, "One in custody." So it's like, you know, every call that we go to where someone's arrested, it always just ends with this simple phrase, you know, everybody is 10-4, one in custody, on our way to the jail. So they went to the RJC, brought him in, they interviewed him for a little bit, and somehow people got wind of it, and attorneys showed up claiming to be his attorney. And finally, the public defender's office showed up, and when they did, we allowed him to go in and talk to him. I gave him about 45 minutes or so with him, and I said, "Okay, you know, we've had a long night, and we're going home. But you guys aren't spending all night here talking. If you want to talk to him, you can go downtown to the jail and talk to him." So I opened up the door, and I said, "No, it's time for you guys to leave. We're done." And I'm going to just be blunt with you. When Ridgeway walked out of that office, I said, "We got you, asshole." I wanted to say more than that, but I didn't. So he went he got his attorneys. He had a team of 8 attorneys, and you know, the first 4 bodies are all DNA, and they said, "Well, yeah, we admit our guy, you know, used women on the street, and when you do that, you're going to leave bodily fluids behind. So we fully admit that. Somebody happened to kill him after he was with them." Well, here's what happened after that. Of course, we were all pretty ticked off about that sort of cavalier explanation, but here's what nailed him, really nailed him. Remember the blouse I told you about on the riverbank that we found? It was a mile down the road that was Cynthia Hines. We didn't know it was hers, but we took it. Things aren't always what it wasn't garbage. Always be as thorough as you can. Take everything that you can. Turned out to be her blouse. Guess what we found on there? Microscopic paint spheres that matched the paint on his coveralls. And then we went out, and every truck that was painted during the time that Ridgeway worked there, so for 30 years, every color, we sent out teams of detectives across the country and even into Canada. We tracked down those trucks that were still on the road that happened to be painted those colors, and we took scrapings from each one. Now, the truckers didn't like this. We scratched their truck a little bit. But we took scrapings from every one of those semi-trucks to get the paint samples to further match it. We weren't just satisfied with coveralls, with his locker search, with paint at home that we finally found. But we went to the truckers, to the trucks, and actually got the paint. So that's number one, Cynthia Hines' blouse. Wendy Caulfield had a ligature on her, and she was in the river for over 2 weeks. So you would assume, if you were just going to assume, that river washing over that ligature on her neck for over 2 weeks would just wash away every piece of evidence, wouldn't you? Like, there can't be nothing left after that river has just been going over her like crazy. Guess what we found on that ligature? Microscopic paint spheres. Now we had him for 2 more murders. And they were different. It wasn't DNA, it was paint evidence. Now explain that one. And the third one, the one that really got him, was Debbie Estes. She'd been, 6 years. 6 years she'd been missing. We couldn't find her. We finally found her body. So she'd been buried for 6 years. And guess what we found in the grave? A decomposing blouse. Now, it was so decomposed that when we went to lift it up, it just fell apart in your hands. I mean, and the fibers, some of the fibers were microscopic. Guess what we found on those microscopic fibers? Microscopic paint spheres. So we nailed him on another one. So now I have him on 7. And so we decided, when the attorneys came to us and said, he wants to plead guilty because he wants to save his life. And he'll tell you about 60 to 65, whatever he can remember. And so we had a big discussion about, what we should do. And we decided, we're going to take the deal. And here's why. So if you have 7 cases, we file the 7, he pleads guilty, and we go to trial, and he's found innocent, not guilty. Gone. Nothing. And we know what's happened. I mean, O.J. Simpson is an example, right? Nothing's ever a for sure deal. So we were worried about that. Although we had the DNA and we had the paint spheres. 2, he's found guilty, or he's found not guilty. That's the first one. He's found guilty, and the jury decides not to put him to death. So they go into the penalty phase, and it just takes one juror to say, I just can't put anybody to death. So guess what? He's found guilty for 7. He gets the death penalty, but he goes before the jury for the death penalty, but the jury can't do it. So he goes to prison for the rest of his life, and we don't learn anything. The last scenario would be he's found guilty, and the jury decides to put him to death. But what happens in this state is that you file appeal after appeal after appeal, and by the time he's 75, 80 years old, it might be cleared up. Somebody might say, okay, we finally got all of his appeals cleared up, let's put him to death. Or they may say, you know what, he's 80 years old, we're just not going to do it now. And right now the governor has put a moratorium on all death sentences. So while he's governor, no one will be put to death. So there would be 8 years right there. If we had made this deal, 8 years that he'd be sitting there, and we would not know what we know today. So we went in, one of the things about the death penalty is it's not always for guys like Ridgeway, it's not a deterrent, but they think it is. Ted Bundy in Florida talked only because he thought he was going to be killed. And then finally the investigators who talked to him during that period of time said, you know what, I'm done talking to you. Unless you start telling us everything, we're not going to play this game out for 10 years. They finally got fed up because he was janking them around so much, and they just were done talking to you, and they put him to death. But the reason he was trying to play it out so long was just to stay alive. And then Ridgeway knew if he didn't, he was pretty certain, obviously, that we were going to find him guilty and that he was going to get the death penalty. I mean, why would you not get the death penalty if you've killed 50 people? So he pled guilty to 49. We closed 51 cases. 2 cases we couldn't quite get to charge him with, but we know he committed those, so we closed those two. And we believe he killed somewhere between 60 and 70. So there's still bodies out there. Now, if a body is found outside of King County, there's a chance that he could get the death penalty, especially in Oregon. If there's a body found in Oregon and we can connect him to that, they've only got 1, maybe 2. He'll be put to death. He'll go for the death penalty in Oregon. We wanted to make this deal. Why? Because we really felt it was important for, number one, for the families of any of those victims to know what happened to my daughter and who killed her. And one of the hardest things I've ever done in this case, besides going to the houses and telling the folks that their daughter was found dead, was I spent 3 days with every family whose case had been charged, so 49 families, at a hotel room in SeaTac. They just came in about an hour and a half apart, continually, to say, we've made a deal, we're going to put Gary Ridgeway, we're not going to put him to death, we're going to give him a chance to talk about all these other cases. And boy, there were a lot of parents that were angry and ticked off over that decision, because wouldn't you be if your 15-year-old daughter was killed by this guy? But we tried to explain that, especially the 7 cases that were charged, those 7 families had a tough time with it. But I said, look, these other families, these other 42 families need to know sure. And I think we can find out, and we did, 42 other families that we needed to make sure that they knew. So how did I end up as sheriff? I want to tell you that story real quick, and then I got time for questions, I think. So patrol, homicide, and robbery. I was promoted to sergeant, but it took me 6 times to take the sergeant's test to get promoted to sergeant. Because the test they gave was the same kind of a test they gave when I got hired. Until they finally changed they changed the test to an assessment center, 8-hour test where you sat down, you had to go through an in-basket, out-basket, and then you had to schedule yourself for mock scenes, a mock city council meeting, at a mock media event. And what I found was my strength was connecting to people and being able to be verbal. So, and I'm not, the most articulate person in the world, but I found that I have, an ability to connect with people. And so, if this will make you feel better, I was number 2 on the lieutenant's test, not 82. And so they made me a lieutenant. I was the SWAT commander. I was a hostage negotiator. I was promoted to captain. When I was captain, I wanted to be the chief of the Shoreline Police Department, which was our largest contract city in the sheriff's office. And 5 captains participated. I was not selected. And I thought, oh man, bummer. And I really wanted that job. I wanted to be the police chief of Shoreline, our largest contract city. Guess what happened 10 months later? There was an opening for precinct commander, a major's rank, in the North End. 5 captains applied for that position and competed. I was chosen by the sheriff to be the precinct commander, and guess what? The guy who was chosen as the chief of Shoreline Police Department is now working for me. See how things work out? 10 months later, after I was precinct commander, Jim Montgomery quits as sheriff. The voters in King County decided to have an elected sheriff, where all of my entire career, we took sheriffs from around, we did national searches. Sheriffs from around the country came in and ran the sheriff's office. But the voters wanted an elected sheriff. My name was given to Ron Sims, who was the county executive, on a Friday, just to say, hey, consider this guy, as you look for a sheriff. It was on a Friday in March. Well, I should tell you, I had back surgery in December of 1996. My foot was paralyzed. And I was looking in the want ads for a job, March of 96, December of 96. All of a sudden, my foot started working. I was back to work in February. So this is why I was precinct commander. Then I came back. My name was given to Ron Sims, the county executive. He had me in on Monday for an interview to be the sheriff. I mean, who would have thought? On Tuesday, he calls my executive assistant and says, hey, I really enjoyed the interview with Dave. Can the sheriff have dinner with me tonight? Or can Dave have dinner with me tonight? On Tuesday night, I had dinner with Ron Sims in Bothell. He offered me the job of sheriff. On Wednesday morning, I was sworn in as the sheriff of King County, the largest sheriff's office in the state, 12th largest in the country. Then I immediately reopened the Green River case, and we solved it, because it was closed all those years. Isn't that something? That's amazing. And now here I am in Congress, and that's a whole other story, how I got there. But should we take some questions? Am I running against up a bell or something here? Or? Okay. Yes, sir.
Listen, you got you talk. First of all, there's 2 questions I have. One, investigating all this crime, did you get sick? And the second question is, did you feel like putting a bullet in his head? I'm serious. Did you feel like
by sick, I never, when I was at a crime scene, I've seen some real horrific crime scenes. And it never really physically bothered me. Here, it bothered me, obviously. I really never had the desire to kill him, but I would say that, he screwed up so many families' lives. And not only that, it was, you know, because I mentioned the families first of all as the reason why we moved forward with this, to try and solve as many cases as we can. But if, you know, none of you were alive during the 80s, but if you go back during that time, the task force was called the task farce back then. They didn't think we cared. We were accused of not being competent in our investigation. When we caught this guy and the attorneys asked for disclosure, we found every document. In fact, I almost, as the sheriff, almost had to sue the FBI because they said they weren't going to give us, Tom can relate to this, they weren't going to give us their documents that they had generated because they were classified. Anything that the FBI does is classified. And I said, you know what, I'll take you to court on that because that's our case. We invited you to help us with this case. We need that information because if we can't get discovery and provide it to defense, we're going to have to let this guy go. So they eventually came up with the information. But I'm a pretty kind of, I don't know, I get ticked off, but I just want to do the job. I mean, that's the thing. Your job is the job. And it's, you know, it can be tough. It can be emotionally draining. It can be physically draining. But you can't let your professional duty get wrapped up in what you would like to personally, you know, what you would personally like to do to someone who's committed a crime. You know, you go through things in your life that help you prepare for challenges like this that will be presented to all of you. Life's not easy. You already know that. You've probably had struggles already. Some days are good, some days are not so good. My friend and partner, Sam Hicks, was killed in June of 1982. So just a few months before I started Green River. Boy, I tell you, that guy was tenacious, awesome detective, sergeant. One of the hardest things I've ever done is do a 3-day search for his killer. We found him out by the Flaming Geyser Park, if you guys know where that is, out by Enumclaw, Black Diamond, Green River, Flaming Geyser Park. And I was the only homicide detective out there, and everyone knew I was Sam's best friend. But the only homicide detective got put in the back seat of a police car to advise this guy who killed my friend, my best friend, shot and killed him, ambushed him, put a bullet through his heart. I had to advise him of his rights. And then he complained his handcuffs were too tight, and he wanted something to eat because he'd been running for 3 days, and he was thirsty. Reminds me of a Bible verse, those of you who kind of might be reading that. We stopped at Burger King. I got him a hamburger and something to drink, and I loosened his cuffs. And I took a statement from him. Did I want to throttle? Yeah. But you can't let that, you know. I wouldn't be here in this office if I did that. I'd be in jail with him. That wouldn't be good. Other questions? Yes.
I know within like the last year, Mr. Ridgeway was transported to the prison.
Mm-hmm.
What is you as an elected official that should ever permit him from doing that?
Yeah, so the state decided, DOC, Department of Corrections, decided to transfer him to Colorado. And we found out after the fact. The Seattle Times somehow discovered, and they wrote an article, and I read the article, and I found out, and I immediately called the press and said, I worked on that case. Everybody knows that anyway. I worked on that case. I have something to say about this. Why did we send him to Colorado? Because according to DOC, when they first explained it, was that we were worried about his mental health because he's locked up in an 8-foot by 8-foot cell. Because if he was in the general population, somebody would hurt him or kill him. So we wanted him to have an opportunity to socialize with other inmates without having that threat of losing his life or being harmed. Well, you know what? The prison system in this country has ways of communicating with each other. It wouldn't be that long before somebody in Colorado prison learned that this was Gary Ridgway, the most prolific serial killer in the history of this country, and that he killed little girls. Doesn't go over good in prison. So that was not a good reason. And who cares if he's suffering or not? You know what? He had his chance to socialize, and he took a whole nother route. He killed people, right? If he wants to socialize, then you know what? My position would be, tell us about the other 15 or so murders that you've committed, and then you know what? We might transfer you to another prison. But if you're going to continue to keep these secrets, then you're going to sit right here in this cell until you decide to tell us what the hell happened to those other women.
Can I also say,
So they transferred him back. He's back in Walla Walla in his cell. So I'm proud.
so can I say, as a retired chemical dependency professional who has worked in the correction system,
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I know, living in the Seattle area, working with the Department of Corrections as a contract worker, as a city professional, I've seen kind of what you're seeing.
Yeah.
But on the different spectrums, I agree with seeing these girls out on 99 and over on SeaTac. It's hard. And I want to say that you inspired me.
Thank you.
So
Appreciate that. Thank you. Thanks. There's one other case, too. I worked the Barn Door Tavern case. I don't know if you read about that or not, but that was a 1980 case where two guys having dinner in a bar, having drinks in a bar, they close the place down, they leave. 10 minutes later, they come back after 2 a.m., pound on the door. This is in SeaTac. Say, we left our wallet, and they open it up. They recognize the guys as having been customers, and they were fine. They open the door, these guys come in, got a gun. Take the two men who were cleaning up afterwards, they put them in a cooler, they bind them with electrical cord. They bind their necks together with electrical cord. They put one sitting on top of the other and blew their heads off in the cooler. They took the three women, they stripped them, and they made them crawl on their hands and knees to the ladies' bathroom, and they hung two of them from a stall in the ladies' bathroom. The other one they hung from a barroom railing and raped her and killed her. The ligatures on the two women in the bathroom broke. They survived. I talked to them in 1980. The next time that I saw them, at least one of them, was in Olympia at a sentence review board hearing just a couple of months ago. So 30-some years later, more than that, I saw her, the lady that survived the ligature strangulation attempt. Now they want to let this guy out of prison. Why? Because he's been a model prisoner. He's gone to classes and he's obeyed all the rules and all these things, but his sentence isn't up till 2040, and they want to let him out in 2018. And he pled guilty to 3 murders, testified against his partner, so he didn't even get sentenced for the 2 attempted murders. But he's only going to do time for 2 murders. Whose murder is he not serving time for? Was the question the families asked. Is it my dad? I want that guy to serve all 3 life sentences, or 20-year sentences, or 25-year sentences. They were going to let him out. So we really raised hell. I mean, I'm all for people getting second chances, but not this guy, not Gary Ridgway, and not Bobby Hughes, the guy that killed my partner. Those 3 can rot. God will deal with them. Right. Yeah.
Can you say something about how profiling or psychological profiling has played a role in some of these cases?
That's a really good question, and it's a hard one to answer. And I've sort of lost touch with kind of any progress in profiling that's happened over the last few years. But in the 80s, profiling actually was just beginning, really, as a science or a tool that could be used by law enforcement. So we had professional psychologists, private psychologists, look at our victimology. So victimology is you take a look at victims and their history and what their life is about. And so with 40-some victims, you can begin to quickly determine, here's what a victim looks like in this case, and why, and what kind of a person would be targeting. So that, the other thing that you looked at was the places where the bodies were found, and that tells you something about the personality of the person committing the murders, and also maybe some of their practices personally, how they, are they traveling between point A and point B and passing by these places? Is it, it causes you to ask all kinds of questions. You can deduce from some of those things, and really whether or not the victims were staged. Some were staged, so some of the women, this is going to be a little graphic, so I apologize, were found with pyramid-shaped rocks inside their vagina that he placed there himself. That was so that no one else would have sex with him, because he went back and had sex with the dead bodies. All of this plays into determining the profile of the guy who committed these crimes. So just like Ted Bundy's profile. Now there's a lot of similarities. If you look at Ted Bundy and you look at Ridgeway, they'll tell you that he, one of the most obvious things are these guys are psychopaths. I mean, there's no remorse at all. Zero. None. They are more guilty over stealing a hubcap than they don't want to get caught doing that, than they are taking the life of somebody. So we had private professional psychologists, psychiatrists involved in trying to look at all that evidence. We had the FBI profiling unit, which was just really in its infancy back then. Look at all the evidence and make some sort of determination as to what they thought was going on. And they based a lot of their information, too, not only in the things that I just mentioned, but also on interviewing people like John Wayne Gacy and some of the other serial killers over history. So gathering, and Ted Bundy was included in that. I interviewed him for 3 days in Stark Prison in Florida. He wrote us a letter and said, hey, I think I can help you understand the mind of the river man. He called him the river man. And the reason that he wanted us to come to talk to him, we knew, was the river man was getting a lot more attention right now than Bundy. Bundy wanted to be #1 serial killer. Ridgeway was in Washington State. Ridgeway was topping that, and he didn't like it. So he was trying to insert himself and gather some attention there. So we went and interviewed with him, and he provided some insight. But everything that he said about our guy is really, in truth, about him, right? Spoken in the third person. That's another part of the profile. So all of that information combined, they give you a personality profile, the age, the race, what profession they most likely might be in. They could even get down to the point of saying they're going to be driving a nondescript vehicle somewhere between a 1970 and a 1990, whatever, and unable to hold a job, very irresponsible family man. Of course, when you look at Ridgeway, he was working at Kenworth for 30 years. So that didn't match. He had been married, this was his third wife. Okay, you could say, well, we know a lot of people who have been divorced and married 3 times. His last spouse, 13 years. So, it was only one of those things that you could use as a tool. So it would just be one of those things in our toolbox that if we had a suspect, we would take him out and we would look at the profiles, and we had more than one. We'd look at the different profiles that we got, and we'd kind of look at this person and see whether or not there was any sort of possibility at all that he would fit into that category. The problem is that with 40,000 tips, there were a lot of people who fit in that category. Yeah, and it was amazing to me that my wife and my daughters and other women in my life that I knew could go from point A to point B without running into one of these weirdos. Yeah. So, yeah. Why? Oh, that's the I'll make it a $1 trillion question. Yeah, we asked him, why did you do this? And he said, because he could. That was it. We'll never know. I mean, you could go back to the profile. You could talk about his family life. You could talk about his relationship with his mother. Now, he only let us have a little peek at that, And it was a very unusual, strange relationship, as you might imagine, with some other serial killers have had too. But when we pressed him on this, it was, he would just say because he could, and that he was jilted by his first wife. His mother was, won't use the word, but you can imagine. And then he went into the Navy, went overseas, got into the world of human trafficking, using young girls overseas in the Navy, came back, had no respect for women, and just decided to kill them. It wasn't about the sex with a person in the human trafficking world. It was all about the hunting and the killing. Because once he's grabbed this person, that person now is his. And once he's killed her, she really is his. And we had one young lady, 16-year-old, who fought him like crazy and scratched him really bad on the forearm, to the point where he actually, to hide the scratches, took battery acid, poured battery acid on his forearm to burn the scars off his forearm, so that people wouldn't ask him how he got the scratches. So he killed because he could. It's one of the, I think, toughest questions in these cases to figure out, is why did Bundy? Pardon me? Oh, yeah, sure, yeah. He was good. He says, oh, yeah. I was good at it. I got it down to a system. He bragged about, he finally got it down to a place where he would get them to think they were having sex. Sometimes it was in his house. He'd get behind them, and he would just put his arm up behind their neck, yank their neck back, choke them, and pull their neck back, put his knee in the middle of their back until they were dead. And he bragged about that. Bragged about having his son with him during one of the murders, 8 years old, and bragged about his driving to work one day, picking up a prostitute, having sex, killed her, put her in the back of his truck, drove to work, worked 4 hours, went to lunch, got in his truck, drove to a dead-end road, had sex with the dead body, drove back to work, finished out his shift. On the way home, dumped the body, drove home, had dinner, watched TV, and went to bed. The negative one I can think of really fast. Positive, I think, the negative was that during that time I was totally disengaged with my personal life, my family. So I would go home, but I wouldn't be home. This would be somewhere else, thinking, what have we missed? What can we do? Because every time you work 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day on this, and then you go home to sleep, your worry was somebody else would be found dead or someone else would be killed overnight. The longer it took us to catch him, the more likely somebody else would die. That was really the positives, I think, and just all the friendships that I made with the families, all the connections I made with the families, all the connections I made with people in the community. I think it made my faith stronger. As you go through it, it's really difficult to feel positive about stuff because you're not making progress, and you're going, now why in the world would God, please God, tell me, why are you allowing, us? There were weeks we were collecting 6 to 8 bodies in 1 week. You find one body, and then somebody would yell, hey Dave, I found another body. And then, 2 days later, hey, I found another one. 2 hours later, found another one. It's just like getting hit over the head with a baseball bat. Positive. It's real hard to come out of that with, other than the relationships and that sort of thing. But I think maybe the faith thing probably is the strongest answer to that. Did you have a question too? No? Anybody else? Yeah.
How old is Ridgeway now, and how long until
He's 64, 65. He's about my age. I'm 65. He was at Tyee High School when I was at Kent Meridian. Yeah, and his sentences are 49 consecutive life sentences, so he's never getting out.
Did he kill up until you guys caught him?
The last, she said, did he kill up until we caught him? The last victim was, I forget her first name, but was Yellow Rope. That was 2001. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, but it's true what they say that they slow down, and he did slow down, but he was still out there. We found that out when we put him under surveillance too. So, yeah.
Did he ever keep anything from his victims?
Yeah, so that's one of the, I drove my task force partners crazy because I still believe today that he had a stash somewhere, that he was taking things from his victims. And he said he didn't, and then he said he did, and then he'd tell us places that he hid them along the highway and out near places where we found bodies, and we go out and search those specific areas, and we never found anything. So a lot of the detectives believe he was one of those who never saved anything. But I still think there's a stash out there somewhere. One of the things that about Ridgeway is he's sitting in prison today, and the reason that he can survive, and we interviewed him for 6 months. So I, as the sheriff, I went to the prosecutor's office, and we said we need to get him out of jail. They wrote up an order where he was going to be evaluated. And we presented the order to the judge to have Ridgeway evaluated. The judge didn't even know that the sheriff's office was taking him. I took a huge risk. Imagine if he had escaped when I had him out of jail at the task force office because we had no bars. We took an office out of the building that we were in, took the door off, put a bed in the office building. We brought in one of those camping showers and hooked it up inside so he was showering right next to the office in this plastic camping shower thing. And he would talk to us, so we interrogated him 6 months to get the information that we could do to collaborate the other evidence and to get the information we needed to get him charged with as many cases as we could. And when we interviewed him, he never once stopped and said, hey, can we stop because I'm hungry? Or can we stop, take a bathroom break? I need to go to the bathroom. He would talk until we said, we got to stop. He just would go and go and go and go. And so he sits in his cell right now. He is remembering, he has these memories of each and every case. So when he says, oh, I don't remember, he's replaying all of those things. He's got a videotape rolling in his head. And the biggest thing for him are the cases he didn't tell us about. So the ones that are the secrets, those are the ones that he, I'm sure, replays more than any of the others, because we know about those, and we found those bodies, but the others, those are his little secrets, and he's just laughing, knowing that he beat us on those. But he's the one in prison for the rest of his life, right? Yeah.
It's hard to get DNA evidence back. You knew it was him. What led you to believe that? Prior to receiving DNA evidence, when you got the results,
Oh, what made him a suspect?
what caused you to think that?
Yeah. What made him a suspect in the first place? Yeah. So he was like, he'd been looked at a couple of times before, and he was like so many other suspects that we had. They had a lot of things in similar, Ridgeway had a lot of things similar with them. He was out on the street. He had one prostitution arrest, so he was on our list of people arrested for patronizing. We had witnesses tell us that he was out on the street, so that added to the tip sheet. He had claimed to someone that he knew a couple of the victims, so that added to the tip sheet. We had a victim come in and talk about him, saying, hey, I think I was with the Green River Killer. He tried to do this to me, and I escaped. We had two young ladies that had that happen to them, so that added to it. So just things like that kind of added up and made him our suspect. And We brought him in and gave him a polygraph test. He passed 2 polygraph tests. He's a pathological liar, so I mean, naturally, that's what's going to happen, right? He's going to pass. So that, along with profiling, is just another tool. So polygraph test is just another tool. Pardon me?
Why weren't you able to arrest him after those 2 women said that he had?
They couldn't identify him.
Problems with eyewitness testimony?
Yeah, yep. Yes?
So how was he able to hide this from his wife or even coworkers? Probably talking friends, but like,
Right.
did he keep everything in his car? Like how did all that?
Yeah, so the thing about guys like Ridgeway is that they associate themselves with women who are very insecure and low self-esteem. That's why he's out on the street in the first place. I mean, these young girls left home because of the things that I described earlier. So they are already at a point where they are depressed, they have low self-esteem, and there's no self-confidence. I give up. What the hell? I'm going on the street and I'm running away from home. So the last wife, who was there for most of it, was one of those women who was totally dependent on Ridgeway. And so as long as she had a nice house, and they had a nice house in Federal Way, a nice house, and the kids were getting fed, and he was going to work and coming home, she didn't care. And he told her, don't ask me where I'm going early in the morning. That's my business. And don't ask me where I've been if I come home late. And so being, someone who is totally dependent on someone else, she was content not to ask those questions. So there's no doubt in my mind she had no clue. She was totally shocked by the whole deal. As we were investigating Ridgeway, interesting that when he was 12, and you can read this in the book, when he was 12, he stabbed a little boy in the woods. He just came across this kid, and he stuck a knife in him. And this little kid says, "Why did you do that?" And he goes, "Well, I just wanted to feel like I just wanted to know what it feels like to kill someone." Well, the kid survived. And I think he was like 6 or something like that. We tracked him down. That's crazy, isn't it? Years later, and he's in his 40s now, and we found him in California. And the reason that we could verify this, so Ridgeway told us about the story, and we thought it was just another, baloney story. But we decided to go back to the school, found some teachers who were at the school. Do you remember a boy who was stabbed in your grade school? Yes, we do. Well, what was his name? So that's how we get his name. And then, of course, we do all this research. We find him in California, and he verifies the story that Ridgeway stabbed him when he was a little boy. He didn't know who he was then. He was never charged because the little boy couldn't identify Ridgeway. So he was already having problems when he was that age, obviously.
Do you work with like Seattle ops or anything like that?
Back then?
Yeah.
No, yeah. Oh, yeah. We had Seattle, the Secret Service, DEA. We used the Secret Service spy plane. We wanted satellite pictures back in the 80s, but the government denied that they had satellites in the sky that could take those pictures. Of course, today we know, you wouldn't, I can tell you so many stories.
Well, the human trafficking organization.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. I spent so much time downtown with undercover Seattle vice detectives, narcotics detectives, and gambling detectives, and also, and travel the country and working with vice in New York, California, travel all over the country trying to find, following up leads. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I can't even describe it. When we finally got to the point that we filed the charges, and we came in and he was going to plead guilty, and pled guilty to all of them. At the end, they take him out. The judge dismisses, because he wants to maintain complete order, he dismisses Ridgeway and his team. He dismisses I forget who the next group was dismissed. And then he said the sheriff is dismissed, because I knew when I left that courtroom during this whole thing, I was going to get swamped by media, and so we were trying to make my way out of there. But when he announced my name, Judge Jones, this is Quincy Jones' brother, by the way, Judge Jones. I just was on the phone with him 2 days ago. But when he said, Sheriff Reichert, you can get up and you can leave the courtroom erupted into applause and cheers. So that said it all. Yes. Zero. None. No. In fact, we took him on field trips, so we would put him in a van. And we would say, take us to Mary West's site. Mary West was found in Seward Park. Now, if you've been to Seward Park, you know that none of the streets in the park were named, at least back then. I don't know if they've named them today. It's been a while since I've been there. But none of the streets were marked with street signs. So he said, okay. So he's in the back of the van, and he's directing the detective, take a left here, go here, take a right, go here. Gets us to the park, no sweat at all. Gets us in the park. Now, years later in the 80s, I was at that scene, Mary West scene. She was taken from Rainier Avenue and dumped in Seward Park. When I went to that scene, the body was found, and I went to that scene. I walked around the entire wooded area that she was found in. My job was I had 100 volunteers and cops that day that I could assign to different tasks. One of them was find the way that the killer most likely took to take the body into the place where she was found. So I identified 3 trails, and I said, "This is probably the number one spot right here. I think that he came in this trail with her." So myself and 2 other detectives, hands and knees, cut down every stick of vegetation. The environmentalists today would not be pleased with us because we were cutting down everything in our path. All our way up to the body, and then we processed that scene. So I was following behind that day in a police car driven by a captain of the task force, the commander. And when he drove up and stopped, and he pointed to the very site that I had picked, 20-some years, 19, 18 years earlier, where he took the body. And yeah, I walked right in on that pathway, and she's right in there. I got emotional. He didn't care. He enjoyed being out in the car and going to these sites because, again, back to the question in the corner over here, he loved reliving the whole thing. So he's actually going back to the sites, which is what he used to do when he was free. He went back to the sites and, as I said, had sex with the dead bodies. So now we were taking him back to the sites, which is, we had to do it in order to, that was just one piece where we didn't tell him where the body was. Show us where it is and where you put him. Yeah. That was going to be their tactic until that paint evidence came, and after that that was it. It was over. Yeah. Yeah.
Does he ever try to contact you? Some prisoners like to try to contact you. Does Ridgeway ever try to make contact with you?
Mm-mm. No, but he's been talking to detectives. Well, I should say they've been trying to get him to talk, and he doesn't tell them anything. But he brings my name up sometimes in the discussion. I don't think he wants to see me again. Well, thank you guys. Really appreciate your attention, and I hope you learn from my experience. And good luck in your law enforcement career. If I could do my career all over in law enforcement, I'd do it over in a heartbeat. This Congress thing is kind of a cool deal. I've been all over the world. I've met presidents, prime ministers, and I've been in Air Force One. I was before I came back from the break, I was at the White House in the Oval Office with President Obama, getting one of my bills signed there. And so it's really been, quite the experience. But I do my law enforcement thing all over again, because, man, you can really make a difference in people's lives at the street level. So, yeah, if you guys have any questions about, your career, if I can help you out in any way, I'd be happy to help. Thank you all. Have a good day.